All right, everybody, we're having a weird problem, which of course is what happens with streaming. It's telling us that the connection is bad, and so we don't really know why that's taking place. Our internet here is on some kind of a shared connection, even though we supposedly have really good upload speeds.
No, you look really good.
So our thing just is intermittent sometimes. Anyway, if it pauses or hiccups or whatever, I'm sorry. The other problem, just real quick, that we had is we're only getting mono audio. So if you're having headphones in, you're only going to hear it in one ear, and I'm sorry about that. That's the best we could do. So here we are. Wow, this is crazy. I'm going to show you some really cool stuff. Look at this. I go over here. He hits the button. Bang. Wide shot. I go over here. He hits the button. Bang. Now we got it over there. We've put a lot of time into this. I've been working on this setup since 2015. And once he's looking, then I can look at the camera and we do cuts. So that's working. I have tally lights up there, which means that I can see which camera is on. And we are bringing you some really good stuff here. This is something, again, I've been working on doing this for 3 or 4 years. We got our gobo lights behind us so that when I look over here, you see this nice colored pattern on the wall. Learn that from Ancient Aliens. We're shining it through a little metal cookie from a Source 4 Junior spotlight, which then goes through a colored gel. And then you want to make it a little bit blurry. So we're having fun with this stuff. I'm really happy that after all this time working on this, I decided to dive in. And trigger the lower third for him if you haven't already done that. Just so you can check that out. That's something else that we figured out how to do. We want to make this look like real TV. If the bandwidth says it's bad, I can't really help that, but apparently it looks fine. So we're doing confidence monitoring here. Everything looks good. Okay, so the reason why I want to talk to you today is to discuss the spiritual implications of what's happening on our world today. And we are in a time of incredible change. You may be experiencing a great deal of personal hardship in your own life. You may be going through real hardship. And actually, that's not a bad thing. When we really get into this cosmic model of the universe that I've been looking at, this whole process of suffering is seen as an opportunity. We have the opportunity to go through these horrible events in our lives. We have the opportunity to suffer, the opportunity for depression. In fact, if you go back to the ancient mystery school teachings, they deliberately would try to cultivate a state called melancholia, in which they were unhappy because they believed that from that state of melancholia, melancholy means sadness, that you would be able to access spiritual truth, spiritual knowledge much better. Another really interesting thing that I saw from the book Rainbow Painting by Tulku Urkyan Rinpoche was this idea that the closest you're ever going to get to Buddha consciousness, which again is just another name for the One Infinite Creator and its awareness, the closest you're ever going to get to Buddha consciousness is when you're on the run from a pack of wild dogs that are trying to rip you apart. Isn't that something? So, there is a deeper context to the reality of our daily lives that many people are starting to understand. And you may be one of those people who really is starting to awaken. And what does an awakening really mean? It means that the conventional reality that most people take for granted has cracks. There's flaws in the design. You're not necessarily believing what the mainstream view of reality would be. When you start to have paranormal experiences, bizarre things like what Dr. Carl Jung called synchronicity, seemingly unrelated correspondences between events, where something happens to you that appears to be in the outside world, but it's also a reflection of your inner world. Now, One of the most common examples of this that would happen for me is I would see a repeating set of digits on the clock, or I would see it on my odometer, or I would see it on a license plate, right as I'm having a very unique thought. Now you have to understand, at that point I was in college. This is when it really started to happen. I'd be reading my book. I'd be reading something about ancient civilizations, Bigfoot, pyramids, Stonehenge, Atlantis, whatever. I'd be reading the book, and after not looking at the clock for like 2 hours and just being very engrossed in what I'm doing, I'd look at the clock and it would say 3:33. Oh, that doesn't mean anything. Okay, but it happened like every time. And it would, like, I'd get the urge to look at the clock, and there it is, 3:33, or 11:11, or 4:44. I wake up in the middle of the night. I have a digital clock. I look at the clock. There it is. Then you're driving your car, and you see it on the clock, and then you see it on the odometer. You get a bank of digits on your odometer. And in fact, it's so ironic, this happened last night. I pulled in from going out at a random trip, and my little 3-digit gas meter was at 800.0. That's because I don't hit the trip thing when I fill up the gas tank. I just let it run. Down to the 10th of a mile, it was at 8000, right as I pull into my parking spot here. So that's one thing. That's an interesting thing. But some people are having really profound, paradigm-shattering experiences. You may have seen something that you can't explain. You might have seen light. You might have seen a ghost. You might have seen an unidentified flying object. You might have had a very, very powerful dream that seemed like it was more than a dream. You may have had an out-of-body experience. Many people have had near-death experiences in which the body is actually clinically dead, which means 3 things. You have cessation of heartbeat, cessation of breathing, and cessation of brainwave activity. And yet, in that clinically dead state, you have awareness, and there's a widespread consensus of what people experience in the near-death experience. Science would tell you that your brain is dead, your body is dead, your brain doesn't have any electrical activity. If your consciousness is only electrical activity in the brain, then therefore you shouldn't be alive, you shouldn't be aware. But there are many reports of people seeing what's going on in the operating room. Even one case of a guy flying out from the building that he was in, flying above the building, looking down on the ceiling, and there it was, a sneaker on the roof. Nobody knew that sneaker was there, but he said it when he got resuscitated. They go up there, and sure enough, the sneaker was exactly where he said it would be. It was the exact same shape. And it isn't like there's just a few of these. There's hundreds and hundreds of great near-death experience stories like this. So that's where reality starts to crack. That's where you start to understand that you're in a living universe. This universe that we live in is not just a product of dumb matter. It's not really doing its thing beyond the typical Cartesian model of materialistic duality, in which you go to church on Sunday and you pray to God, but then during the week you're a scientist who's debunking the idea that there is such a thing. What I've been able to do in my work, and this is now 3 published books, we have Source Field Investigations, Synchronicity Key, and Ascension Mysteries, is I've gotten into the science of the living cosmos, the alive universe model. Yeah, you can put that down now. Beth is being very nice in terms of shoving the cue card in my face to make sure that we hit the talking points that we had agreed on, because part of the idea is I don't want to ramble for a long time. I want to keep this fairly tight and concise, but I also want to get through some substantive discussion with you. So the living universe is very, very important to what we're talking about. Now, it's a typical view in our mainstream reality that we're getting errors.
Yeah, I don't even see the screen now. Yeah.
Did it collapse?
Might come and go, so we're gonna see what happens here.
Are we actually live? Are we actually streaming?
Well, I have a black. No, I see you now.
Okay.
I see you.
Okay, we're sorry about this. This is probably some kind of, yeah, I know you're probably going to laugh. Some of you will laugh, but we are probably being attacked. Our bandwidth is being attacked. This is a predictable event. We are on a shared internet trunk line, so it would make sense that our enemies would try to disrupt this broadcast, especially because we, did it in advance. We told you this was going to happen in advance. So I will just keep talking, and hopefully, if there are gaps in this, you'll still get the gist of what I'm trying to say.
I see you.
Are we live now?
I see you. I don't see the chat. That's right.
I see both.
Okay. Maybe because you're both confidence monitoring, we got too many people pulling on our bandwidth. We should probably, you should probably sit with him, and just because then we're not having as much bandwidth problem.
All right.
Yeah, just shut the thing. Do I look good? Everything's okay? I'm sorry, folks. This is new for us, and
Somebody said you've been live all along.
okay. So there's staggering complexity in trying to get this to work. Where you have 3 camera angles, we have the audio, everything has to work. We worked on lighting, we worked on everything. So, and then I have all these other distractions and all this chaos in my life, and that's the joy of the dance, right? Everything is converging, everything's happening all at once. So we keep rolling, and let's just try to get back on track. My hope is that this will be more professional in the future. Yeah, I know the cue cards. Thank you very much. That's so generous of you to hold paper up in my face while I'm talking. So we're talking about the living universe. Now, this is a very, very significant point. There is a whole branch of Russian science that they've had over 40,000 published papers that was secret, classified for national security up until the fall of their Iron Curtain in 1991. In the aftermath of that collapse, you have the communist system in which people are being paid as scientists, whatever it was, $30 a month equivalent, which is good for them. But now there's no war to fight, there's no national security. So they could declassify the things that they were working on and bring them out to the public. Part of what was classified was the work of Dr. Nikolai Kozyrev. And Kozyrev is an amazing character because he was involved in the concentration camp, actually. Stalin put him in a concentration camp. You may not be aware that scientists were rounded up because the communists were worried that scientists could have critical thinking and outmaneuver their political machinations. So if you were a scientist, you were literally targeted for being put in a concentration camp. Kozyrev he was the first person actually to ever suggest that we might find water ice on the moon, that we could mine the ice for water and then use that for colonization of a lunar colony. He was doing great, and then he gets in the concentration camp, and his life turns to hell, and they're fighting over literally eating starch, like liquid starch that has no flavor in it, that kind of stuff. It's just horrible existence. So, interestingly enough, if you go back through all the literature about various spiritual traditions, when people go through extreme adversity, sometimes they get unbelievable powers that happen. And this is why if you look at like a book like China's Super Psychics by Paul Dong, he's showing you people from the hardest hit, most poor parts of China who are doing incredible things. Kids who can take a bottle of pills and teleport the pills out of the bottle. They're just holding it in their hand. There's pills inside the glass. No sleight of hand, no trickery. They hold it in their hand, and the pill just falls out onto the table. And they've even done interesting things. Some of these kids were actually able to teleport larger objects in and out of an enclosure. And one of these objects had a beeper on it, and what they found was that the timing of the beep changed as the beeper was teleported. In other words, the beeper's going at a set speed, and as the teleportation starts to occur, as the beeper becomes partially invisible and then completely invisible, the beep gets slower and slower and slower. So there's some relationship between the time factor and the materialization factor. So this is one of the things that Dr. Nikolai Kozyrev ultimately discovered. And this is where, for me, it got very confusing because he called this new energy field that he found, the waves of time. Now, what am I saying here? I'm saying that Kozyrev discovered that time was not locally invariant, unlike what Einstein says. In Einstein's model of physics, the only way that you're going to get time to dilate or change is by accelerating your whole frame of reference, your whole, like if you're in a spaceship and you go towards light speed, right, then the idea is time's moving a lot faster for you inside that ship. This is the classic relativity paradox. Your time is going faster. You come back to Earth after 10 minutes, it's been 500 years, whatever the math is. And then, as you may know if you've read my books, Einstein's model was actually verified when you had atomic clocks flown in high-flying jet airplanes at a high-speed supersonic aircraft, and sure enough, based on the exact relativistic time dilation, time moved slightly differently for those clocks in the planes than it did on Earth. So the faster you move through space, the more time is actually speeding up for you so that you experience less duration compared to everybody else. So you might think it's only 10 minutes, but for them it's 10 years or longer. You only get a very subtle amount of this when you're in a plane. Okay, it's not like it's going to be very much, but they could measure it with these atomic clocks. So this is where it gets really cool and weird. Dr. Nikolai Kozyrev is discovering that Einstein was wrong. Oh my God, heaven forbid, right? He's supposed to be like your scientific savior. That's what a lot of people, there's almost like a worship of Einstein in some sense. So when you're not actually dealing in relativity anymore, but you're dealing in torsion physics, as they call it, this is the Russian science, time can be changed in the lab. You can alter the speed that a watch or an atomic clock or any other type of scaled time measurement system works. And then what's also weird is that in addition to changing the flow of time, it can be measured. There were different ways that these waves could be measured. You could measure these time waves, as he called them, with the mercury level in a thermometer. You have an isolated thermometer in which there's no other temperature fluctuations, but then by simply beaming these waves in, the mercury goes up or down, but there's no actual temperature change. And then there's other things that he was able to do, various other methods of how to get these waves detectable. So, what are these waves? How are they generated? Interestingly enough, he found out that a wave would be created when, for example, you go from liquid water to a solid, if it freezes to ice, a phase transition, or if you get liquid water to boiling water, you would get this noticeable change. Now, let me just describe to you another one of the ways that he was able to detect these waves. There's something very subtle about the wave, about the way it works. It's actually ultimately, and in the source field investigations book, I go into this in great length, it is a twist in gravity. Now, that's very important because, wait a minute, David, you said it was time. Yes, time ultimately appears to be a function of gravity. Time is gravity powered. And then the really crazy part is that consciousness is gravity powered, but we'll get to that in a second. So, when we have various things like phase transitions, or if you break an object, or even he had some cases where he would shake a weight up and down, you could measure these waves. One of the ways he measured a wave was with an asymmetrical balance beam. It's got 10 grams of weight on one side, 1 gram on the other side. Obviously, this side's heavier. So in order to get it to be a straight line, you have to hang the string way over towards the side that's heavier. Okay? You hang that string, you got the heavier side, the lighter side, and it's balanced perfectly. And then the last step was that you had to vibrate the top of the string. You had to have a high-level vibration there so that the pendulum stops moving, but that there's actually a lot of vibration in the string. Now, for some reason, when you do this, and then you have, let's say it's sealed inside a glass container, there's no air resistance going into it, the air inside is constant. And then outside, even like 10 feet away, you start shaking a weight up and down, and the weight, believe it or not, creates a wave that then makes the pendulum move. This balance beam moves, and it points towards where the source of the wave is. Now, this is crazy enough, but again, he discovered that there were different ways to generate these waves, phase transitions, plants that are dying. The waves change from day to night. There are certain parts of the day where they get stronger and weaker. None of this known to Western science. And again, anybody who's trying to cross their arms or say this is BS, there's 40,000 published papers on torsion fields. And then after the fall of the Iron Curtain, yeah, I know, thank you. It's good, please. 40,000 papers published from the former Soviet Union that are now public domain, and I went through all of them in the late 1990s. It was an incredible, incredible process for me. An enormous learning curve. There's a lot of things to learn here. So if somebody's just trying to say, oh, this is all BS, David's making this up, this is pseudoscience, this was the highest level scientific institutions in Russia. This was multiple people studying this, multiple institutions, and it was classified for national security. Now, why might it be classified for national security? Well, this gets into something really interesting that happened. You going to follow me there? All right, great. This gets into something interesting that happened with Dr. Nikolai Kozyrev. And I love this part of the story, because remember, he's got the balance beam, and he can burn something, and then it points towards the burning. He can freeze something, it points towards the freezing. He can break something, but there's no air, there's no vibration, normal vibration that would cause this. One day, he had the thing sitting there, and he's reading his book on the temptation of Faust by Mephistopheles, the classic book about being tempted by the devil. And of course, if you'd grown up in the concentration camps, that could happen to you. You could end up being tempted to do things that are self-serving and destructive. At that moment where Faust accepted the temptation from Mephistopheles, he has this huge emotional surge, a very powerful biological response. His whole body goes into fight or flight. And at that moment, the needle pointed towards him, showing the possibility of a connection with his consciousness to the waves. The consciousness creates the waves. And they've done many other studies since then confirming that our mind can create the wave. So this is a very interesting thing because it suggests the possibility that consciousness is not local to your brain, that it's an emergent phenomenon that ripples out into the world. And there are some really cool studies that have been done on this stuff. One is Dr. William Broad, who actually looked at the science of being stared at. And it turns out that if you're sitting in a lab and there's a hidden camera in the room, you don't even know it's there, and somebody stares at you through another camera in another room, even if you're not consciously aware that they're staring at you, during the times they stare at you, your physiological activity in your body goes way up. You start having noticeable change in your skin conductivity. The galvanic skin response, or GSR, actually changes, which means you're sweating a little bit more and a little more electricity conducts through your skin. Well, how weird is that? They've been able to prove that when you are being stared at, that your body knows. Even if it's in a different room and you're only being stared at through closed circuit television on a hidden camera that you don't even know about. Then the question becomes, well, does the conscious mind recognize that it's actually being stared at or not? Most of us probably know, but then there's always been those cases where you feel that. It's like, somebody's looking, somebody's looking. So that's okay. It's okay to understand that the science has already been done. The results are in. Skeptics are not looking at all the evidence. It's that the science doesn't get publicity. That's the really important part. We have the data, we know it's good, we know it's real, but it's not getting publicized. That's the whole problem. So now I want to take it again to a wider view here and look at the idea that these are the emanations of a living universe, that consciousness is the basis of the universe. And this gets into sacred geometry, another one of my most favorite subjects that I've talked about so extensively in various lectures. We have two scientists from Caltech, Nima Arkani-Hamed and Yaroslav Trunka. And what they did was to follow up on research done in the 1970s by Sir Roger Penrose about the basic nature of space, time, matter, energy, consciousness, reality as we know it. Okay? Now, Penrose was looking at a very, very strange theory, and if you've heard my talks or you've watched my shows, you might have heard this before, but it's worthy of repetition. Sir Roger Penrose was looking at the idea that all of the different squiggles that we see in the quantum realm are emanations from a single point, a single object, if you will. Now, they kind of have this idea in quantum physics. To a degree, it's talked about. It's kind of like the idea of the Higgs boson. If you've ever studied that, it's kind of this idea that there's only really one particle that the whole universe is coming from. Well, Penrose had started to map out what this shape might look like. And he had actually been able to map out a whole lot of diverse quantum behaviors to this shape. But he couldn't quite solve the problem. So Nima Arkani Hamed and Yaroslav Trunka came back later on in the 2000s. And they go in and they start cracking the numbers, and they actually solved the equation. What that means is that they now have scientific evidence, scientific proof that all quantum fluctuations, everything that we would call a particle, everything, whether it's a quark or a lepton or a tau or a muon or an electron or a neutrino, I don't care what it is. We're addicted to particles, just stop the particles. It has nothing to do with particles. What we're really looking at now is a sacred geometry, a geometric pattern. And that pattern actually has all of the information in it that we need to model everything that's happening in the whole universe. It's the fluctuations off the edges of this geometry. And I know it sounds crazy. It's the amplitude, the amount of fluctuation, and then the waves that come off, but it's all this one shape that's vibrating. Now, what's so cool is that it's the shape of the Merkaba. Now, Elizabeth, would you go get me that sculpture that we have on the back porch? Would you open up the door and grab that aluminum? Okay. Because that's a good... I'm talking about something, but I want to give you a visual. And so if I actually have a prop, which one of my fans actually gave us this, you're probably going to have to detach it or something, or actually... Okay. So before you get the model, we will talk more about what this thing is. It looks like the Star of David. It looks like two triangles interpenetrating one another, like your typical Hebrew Star of David, which again they believed was the shape of the universe. But it's a three-dimensional Star of David. And here it comes right now, so you can see what this looks like. Okay. Let's do this one. Let's do this camera, yeah. So now you can see that there's different phase relationships of this thing. So like if I hold it like this, let's see if I can do this right. It's really tricky, yeah, like to get the... Okay, there we go. So notice when I do it that way that it looks like a cube. Okay, you can see that it appears to be cubical. But then when I tilt it this way, right, and then if I do that, you can see, okay, now it's got another shape, right? It looks like the two triangles interpenetrating one another. But then if I go, let's see, this way, this would be my favorite. Yeah, this is really tricky. Okay, here we go. Boom. So this is like one of the best ways to look at it, because now you're looking at it from the side, and you can see the Star of David shape appearing in three-dimensional space, right? So what we're actually saying is that there's only this in the whole universe. This is the new model, that the center of the universe is comprised of one of these shapes. And then you got to say, well, what is the shape, David? What does it even mean? We don't really know what this thing actually is. Is it matter? Not really. It's the source of matter. Is it time? Not really. It's the source of time. Is it space? Well, it's the source of space. All past, present, and future is contained in this. All matter is contained in this. It's an emanation of this. All consciousness is contained in this. This is the primordial shape of the universe. The whole entire universe, no matter how big or no matter how small, no matter whether it's past, present, or future, it's all an emanation coming off of this geometry. And here in the close-up you can see it even more. And there's all these, that's another really cool way to look at it. Let's Let's see if I can get that to happen in a way that looks good. So you can see, there we go. That's probably the best way to look at it. Now you can really see how it has that geometric look of the Star of David, right? So this is very bizarre because there are these Hindu mandalas that actually show you how this shape looks. And they say that it's the source of creation and that it's this primordial aum, this primordial sound that's coming out. So in the beginning there was light, or in Hinduism they say there was the aum, the primordial sound. Somehow these ancient traditions said the universe started as a vibration, that it started as some sort of emanation from something. And now we have the most cutting-edge modern physics telling us there is no space, there is no time, there's only this intrinsic geometry, and you will find it at any point in the universe if you magnify enough, if you drill down deep enough, and you look at what's in there, you're going to see this thing. You're going to see this shape. So all quantum manifestations are just jiggles off of this shape. And it's really confusing because that would mean the shape is simultaneously the largest shape in the universe and the tiniest shape in the universe. The boundary of the whole universe is this shape, and the tiniest subatomic quanta is this shape. It's everything. And then it also means that the shape has past, present, and future all contained within an implicate order. It's all happening at once. Now that's a lot of really, really heavy geek speak here. And the sacred geometry is very cool because I've taken that model and I've extended it into quantum physics by looking at the work of people like Dr. Robert Moon. I had a very close friend who died named Rod Johnson, who had done a lot with the quantum model, kind of following off of Buckminster Fuller. There's all kinds of stuff that I've geeked out about over the years on quantum geometry, like the idea that the electron is a geometric manifestation. When you look at the electromagnetic wave, it's an implicit tetrahedron because you have an electrostatic wave and a magnetic wave, and they exist in a 90-degree angle to one another, and you can connect the dots between the farthest points of those two waves, and you get a tetrahedron, which again, this shape is just two tetrahedrons, right? So if you look at it a certain way, like I'm now showing you the triangle in the front here, this would be the face of the tetrahedron along here, okay? So you can see it's got a triangular base at the bottom. So you got 1, 2, 3 points and then 4 at the top. That's your tetrahedron. You can see it in there. So when it's in a Merkaba shape like this, when it's crunched together, that would actually be like an electron, or a photon in this case, collapsing. So the whole universe actually is a photon. That's what's so cool. They say, let there be light. They say, light is the implicate order. So if a photon is actually this Merkaba, then the whole universe is made of light. It's a scientific validation of what we've heard so much of. So this also is a very, very important discussion as it relates to DNA. Now, why do I say that? Because DNA appears to be a basic byproduct of quantum physics itself. There's a lot of really cool sacred geometry we could go into, but right for now in this broadcast, I'm going to stick with things that if you've seen all my stuff, you've heard this, maybe this is going to be new to you. But I want to talk to you now about Dr. Luc Montagnier. This is a scientist who won the Nobel Prize for a dubious thing, which is discovering HIV. It kind of gives you the heebie-jeebies, right? You're like, oh, I don't know. But okay, he discovered HIV, he discovered the virus, and he won a Nobel Prize for it. So we're talking mainstream, credible guy. Nobel Prize winning scientist. What does he do? He takes 2 tubes of water, and one tube has a little bit of DNA in it, and the other tube is plain water. And then all he does is he runs electrical current around those tubes. He's got a coil of wire, and he runs a 7 hertz electrostatic frequency through that, which is the base frequency of Earth. It's called Schumann resonance, okay? 2 tubes of water, one with DNA in it, one that's just plain water. Basic Earth's energy frequency, electrical, 7 hertz, it's very low vibration. You run it that way for 18 hours. You take the tube out that had nothing but plain water in it, you test it, and now it's got DNA. This is a civilization-defining discovery. Alchemical transmutation, hydrogen and oxygen, H2O, transforming into DNA, which is a complex amino acid polysaccharide structure, not just made of hydrogen and oxygen. The only explanation for this is elements transmuting from hydrogen and oxygen building blocks to much more complex proteins, amino acids, and ultimately the DNA molecule itself. It's totally crazy, because what it means is that anywhere that there's water in the universe, you could potentially have DNA. He presented this information at the United Nations, and some scientists got it, but others reacted with the predictable level of skepticism. They simply don't want to believe that life, that DNA itself could be part of the implicate order of the universe, that it emanates from the quantum blueprint, that there's something in quantum physics. Forget about all these equations, right? We're so used to thinking about the science has to be all these equations on a page. There's something alive at the quantum level. It's not going to be seen in algebra. There's no life algebra, okay? You're not going to get it in an equation. You get it by seeing what happens to water. You get it by seeing the development of DNA in the water. So it's a very, very exciting discovery, and the only group that was willing to support Dr. Montagnier was in China. So he actually has had to move to China to get finance to be able to continue to do his research. And that's really sad. It's similar to the Wright brothers, who achieved powered flight, but they couldn't get anybody to pay attention to it in America. They had to literally ship the plane by sea over to France, rebuild it in France, fly it in France. The French were open-minded enough to actually watch the plane fly and say, yes, that's real. You show it to people in America, no, I don't believe it, I don't effing believe it. It's not real. Powered flight is impossible. Heavier than air flight is impossible. We've scientifically proven it with all these steam equations about the volume of water and the weight of the water and how much energy and joules it takes to create steam. We've scientifically proven you can't fly. But what about the bird? Oh, well. So look, this is what I'm saying. The same thing has happened now with the living universe model. We have the proof. It's just not getting publicized. And so part of why I'm doing this now is to start to bring this more out into the mainstream. You're going to be able to watch this video on YouTube. We've had our hiccups. I apologize for that. We didn't know, it was telling us our bandwidth was bad. But you guys are saying that you're seeing the show, so we keep moving forward here. Now, this DNA aspect is very important because you are a creation of some sort of quantum intelligence. Your body is made of DNA. You are a being that could have been created from a hidden wave that could manifest life where none existed. Your whole identity, your whole consciousness could be contained in a wave. And there's so much more to talk about with all that stuff. There's so much science. But we got to expand the scope beyond that. And we have to go into what does all of this stuff really mean for you today? Where is this really taking us? And where I want to take it now is the law of one material, because I was doing dream work for 3 years. I was writing my dreams down every morning. I was getting amazing data coming through. And my dreams were starting to tell me really interesting stuff. I was getting future prophecies. Like, I remember one time I had a dream about a problem with my car, and then that day the car broke down and actually a wheel completely went flat. Now, how did my dream know that I was going to have a flat tire that day? It's very, very interesting. And you start having a lot of these, you start thinking about things differently. If you pay attention to your dreams and if you understand the language of dreams, which I will be teaching in this class that's coming up, if you understand the language of dreams, you can actually use your dreams to get a psychic reading, if you will, divination on a daily basis. So this is why I don't go out and I don't try to get psychic readings. I get my own information from my own dream source. It's secure. I know that it's coming from the right place. I've learned over the years that I can trust my dream data. It's not going to set me astray. It's going to keep me on the right track. And dreams speak in a very interesting symbolic language. So you don't get things on the nose. People tell me, David, I saw you in my dream. You came to my dream. You came to me. Well, in Jungian terms, if you have found spiritual inspiration from my work, you probably see me as what Jung would call the transcendent aspect. So this is ultimately a projection. This is something you don't want to do. Jung says the greatest gift we can give to the world is to withdraw our projections from it. So Jung has 4 basic parts of the soul that he talks about. He has the shadow, the anima, the animus, and the self. The shadow is a part of you in which all of your darkness, your negativity, your fear, your anxiety, and your pain is located. And when that shadow activates in your conscious mind, typically you're in great trauma, you're crying, you're yelling, you're screaming, you're having a very upsetting event in your life. Your shadow is activated. You are in that part of yourself. Unfortunately, what many of us do is we project. We don't want to look at the part of ourselves that is loathsome and wretched. We don't want to admit our shortcomings. We don't want to admit our flaws. So we look for the flaws in our environment. And this is also interesting. What was Hitler's main source of humor during the Nazi regime? Schadenfreude, the joy in others' misery. All of the Nazi humor has to do with making fun of people, denigrating them, putting them down, laughing at them, humiliating them. That's what they got off on, okay? And we're hearing some people just speeding around up here in the mountains. That's what that sound is, if you can hear that in the background. It's this crazy traffic that's going on. So, I don't think it's a wise thing to do that. Jung is talking about the idea that when you have a shadow that is not integrated, when you have childhood trauma that you have not healed, it projects out into your reality. You're looking for a villain, and you want to be the victim. Now, how do I know this? Because in the past, I did this. You actually get a payoff from thinking of yourself as a victim. Now, this is hard to accept. It's hard to be honest enough with yourself to see that there is a part of you that is very self-destructive. There's a part of you that is jealous, that is angry, that is vindictive, that wants revenge, that thinks that you need to use dirty tricks to get ahead, to protect yourself. You don't need to do that. You withdraw those projections from your environment. You bring them back to yourself. What does that mean? Now, the projection comes back inside you, and you're able to see that you were the shadow, that you're angry at yourself. There's something within yourself that was upsetting you. You got it? See, I got tally lights. I know where he's going. Middle one. Let's do the wide now. So you're projecting something outside yourself that's actually within. Now, here's a really important thing that would come out of the Law of One philosophy. We're going to talk a lot more about this in the course that's coming up. And this is the idea that you actually do have these different aspects of your consciousness. The shadow is a part of you that must be healed, it must be integrated, it must be transformed. You can only do that by loving yourself. If you don't love yourself, then here's what's going to happen. Other things that you see will piss you off. You get pissed off by people, you get pissed off by situations, it makes you angry. The ultimate goal in the Law of One system, which is the system I teach, is to become balanced enough that you're not moved by experience. And that's what they would call a perfectly balanced entity. So there's a great quote where they say, to a perfectly balanced entity, there is no such thing as an emotionally charged situation. There are only 2 choices. There's the choice to be of service or the choice to withdraw from the situation. Either choice is spiritually acceptable. There's so much to be milked from that statement, with the idea ultimately being that once you have loved yourself, if let's say you've had a weight problem, right? I did in the past. I weighed 225 pounds at 5'9". I lost 85 pounds while I was in high school. I did it in a bad way. I basically went anorexic. All I had for breakfast was a V8 vegetable juice. I drank water in between every class in school. I always had to pee. I didn't eat until I got done with school, and I'm literally sitting there all day in school grinding with hunger. Okay, but I lost a lot of weight really fast, and somehow, even though I got really sick at the end, it didn't come back. So if you don't have, let's say that you haven't healed the fact that you have a weight issue, right? I want to give you an example of projection so you really get this. You haven't loved yourself for the fact that you're struggling with your weight. You see someone else who has a weight issue, and you start knocking that person. Oh, look how fat they are. Oh, isn't that disgusting? Oh my God, it's like the Michelin Man. It's the Goodyear blimp. Schadenfreude. Misery is joy. Then you can extrapolate from this. If you feel insecure about your level of education, then you go after people who are smart. If you're insecure about your level of wealth, you go after people who you see have more wealth. If you want to be famous but you're not, then you hate on celebrities. This is a cottage industry. The whole thing is breaking down now with what happened with the National Enquirer literally trying to blackmail the head of Amazon, Jeff Bezos, with his own pictures of himself naked. They literally tried to blackmail one of the most powerful men on the planet, and he shot the hostage. This just happened the last couple of days. This is a way to prove that it's live, okay? Bezos shot the hostage. He said, go ahead and publish my dick pics, but you are not going to blackmail me. And honestly, I don't really have much of a care for Jeff Bezos, but I admire him for that. He really made a hard decision. Ooh, there's so many places we could go with this. The penetrating insight into the... See, I'm getting notes over here. I'm getting coaching from my wife.
No, I'm not coaching you. That's yours.
Hot dog. Let's just leave it at that. Right. Okay. I would not look at the Jeff Bezos pictures, by the way. I would... the guy's got a bald head, and he's just like this weird squinty eye. And no. I don't want to see that. Okay. He might be watching. Yeah, wouldn't that be great? I get sued for defamation and slander. But I think everybody's talking about this right now, so I don't think I'm going to get singled out. Love you, Jeff. You're good, buddy. Lots of people send dick pics. You just happen to get caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. So, anyway, no matter what the issue is, now we're not going to do any live dick pics for this broadcast. I don't know what the hell the people are saying in the live stream right now.
Cucumbers and stuff.
Cucumbers, okay.
Yeah.
Some people like to try to read their live stream, but I imagine it's just going lightning fast, and I couldn't even read it. But I thank you, and I will go back and review the chat log, maybe because I have some haunting sense of self-punishment. It's pretty good? Okay, that's great. That's great. So I want to explain this. Projection is so important to understand because I see so much of it in the world. The projection of our shadow. There's something you don't like about yourself, and you see it in somebody else, and you attack them for it. So, here's a good exercise for this little episode of my live show. The next time you catch yourself having a judgmental thought about someone else, think to yourself, is this my issue? Do I actually have a feeling like this about myself? Am I upset about this quality in my own being? Do I think that I'm not intelligent enough? Do I think that I'm not beautiful enough? Do I dislike the way my skin looks? Do I dislike my age? Do I wish I was younger? Do I wish I didn't have lines on my face? Do I wish that I had more success, better job, better career, whatever? Am I angry because somebody else seems to have something that I don't? Am I projecting my own shadow onto that person? And it is an amazing process, if you're really an awakening soul, to recognize that you could heal the whole thing by loving yourself. So regardless of how advanced and esoteric all spirituality can get, all of the machinations of sacred geometry, and the tarot cards and Kabbalah and ancient mystery schools and all these intricate things people love to get their hands into. They love information. They say, David, where's the new information? I want new information, new information. There's certain principles that would be called ageless wisdom that are not going to be new information. But what is new information is when you finally figure out how to apply them to yourself, and then you see the transformation that results from doing so. Withdrawing your projections, in Jung's view, and he was a very prominent scholar, is the most important one of all. So let's go through real quick now the other three aspects of Jung in what he would call the different archetypes. These are his primordial archetypes, right? Shadow, we just went through that. Then he's got anima and animus. Now let's handle those two next. The anima is a feminine spirituality, and the animus is a masculine spirituality. It's some part of your soul, okay? Mainstream psychologists, now some of you might want to argue with me about this, but I would argue that it's the subconscious. So the subconscious does appear to be the part of us that dreams dreams. They used to call it the unconscious. Jung at one point called it the collective unconscious, which is this greater archetype of self that we'll get into. But anyway, you have anima and animus. Now, this is really interesting too, because again, Jung said you got to withdraw your projections, right? The projected anima would be a feminine spiritual presence on earth. And a lot of times with the anima, you get into a worship of beauty. So we are projecting the anima like crazy in our society. We worship actresses. We worship supermodels. There's pictures of them all over the place. We like to see them unclothed. We like to see the sexy stuff with Victoria's Secret. We like to see the lingerie. That's all part of it. There's this sort of worship of beautiful women. And that is a projection of the anima. But then also there are characteristics that really now you're starting to get more into the actress aspect, where they play these characters on film and they embody the character so completely, and we fall in love with this woman, and we start to even believe, a lot of people start to believe that they're in some kind of relationship with them. They have posters on the wall in their own home, and they're feeling connected, okay? Now, I'm not saying that's bad, but what I am saying is that the anima is a part of yourself that's a feminine spiritual center, and your ultimate goal is going to be to find it within yourself rather than projecting it out into the world. Now let's talk about the animus. The animus is the divine masculine. And so this animus projection so often happens with athletes, or at least it did. Like when I was in school, the jocks got all the attention. And I was definitely not a jock. As I said, I was very heavy until I lost 85 pounds. And then I basically was just this kind of weird, smart guy who also people knew was smoking marijuana. Because I had a marijuana issue up until I was 19 years old, at which point I completely stopped, and I now have 26 years sober. So the animus projection, the divine masculine projection, we see this with superheroes, right? And the superhero now, if you want to get cast in a Hollywood movie for that role, you got to be really buff, really strong, really big. You have to, most of these guys end up having to use performance-enhancing drugs because you're not going to get that way just with regular working out. You have to sculpt yourself. So what I'm saying is that each of us, depending on your gender, as a general rule, your primary access in Jungian terms to your higher self, to your full consciousness, is going to be with the corresponding gender archetype. Now, that sounds like a lot of jargon, and I'm sorry, but let me just simplify it for you. If you're a man, your primary access to the universal consciousness is through your animus. If you're a woman, your primary access to the universal consciousness is through your anima. What? Once again, my wife is policing me.
I'm not policing you.
And saying that we need to cut it off.
I'm not policing you. You shouldn't vilify me.
Well, you're going like this. Okay. I'm not vilifying you. I just, how much time have we done so far? We're an hour. Okay. Okay. So we didn't want to go much beyond that. So, you know, it's all, we're working as a team here, It's all good. I get on a roll. I want to keep going. Okay. So I just want to get through these archetypes. So if you're a man, you're going through your animus. If you're a woman, you're going through your anima primarily. And then the other archetype that Jung had was the self. And this is really interesting because his concept of a collective consciousness of the primordial one infinite creator is self. And this comes from him having had a near-death experience in which he identified the universe as the self. So that's really cool. So ultimately, his idea is that you want everything to become part of yourself. And this means, actually, you're not looking for heroes anymore. Both Elizabeth and I have had to go through this in our own world. She just had another example of it recently, and I highly recommend that you read her latest article. And what was that called? The Divine Feminine? The Divine Feminine, the Fall of Corrupt Kings. So one of the things that's going on right now is this archetypal fall of the corrupted masculine. So what did I say about projecting our animus, right? We project our divine masculine self out into the world, and we make certain male figures into heroes who we then end up worshiping. It's not just athletes. It can also be politicians. It can also be gurus, spiritual figures, this kind of stuff. Left and right, we are seeing these institutions collapse. We are seeing these people being exposed in really shocking, horrendous ways. And it's very, very heavy stuff. So what's going on there is that those projections are now falling out, and we're not seeing it anymore. We're not seeing the same people that we used to see. We are starting to understand there is this deep state working behind the scenes, and the deep state is getting our votes, and it's trying to get us to love it, trying to get us to love these people, but they have a very, very dark side. So that's okay. That's part of withdrawing your projections from people that were established as heroes, bring it back to yourself. How can you be the hero of your own life? How can you be your own animus or your own anima? That is very important. And so what we are really trying to do here now is keep this discussion going. I didn't want to go much over an hour, so there's been a lot of things that are mentioned here. And this is a fun thing for me. We've done so much work to get this going, and I'm so happy that the stream is working. I apologize to Elizabeth for, her trying to police me, and I get a little testy about it. I'm not perfect either. Look, I get on a roll. I don't want to stop. And we were thinking I was going to only do 15 minutes. That didn't happen. But you keep it to 1 hour, people are more apt to watch. And, so I won't go too much beyond that. Anyway, this whole process of ascension is going to be discussed in future modules of this that we're going to do here. We're starting with videos, and this is eventually going to be migrating into a class. And I'm going to share in this class some really incredible stuff. We're not going to talk too much about it right now. We have other videos coming up where I'm going to talk about different aspects of this. But the idea of what is ascension is a very important point. Ascension is ultimately coming into a higher spiritual consciousness, learning that you are part of a living universe, learning that your consciousness is connected to all there is, and that we are one being. And as you go through this, it involves learning to love yourself. As I said, loving yourself is the bullseye. Too many people get way out there with all their spiritual speculations, and you just got to keep it simple, because you can get really locked up in your head and forget to love yourself. And if you don't really love yourself, then you're projecting, and those projections become damaging, and they blow back into your life and cause problems. You don't want to be projecting. You want to keep your projections in. Instead of looking for heroes out there, find the hero within yourself. Instead of looking for the shadow out there, identify the parts of yourself that you haven't fully loved. See what you can do if you can improve them. If you can learn to love yourself more, that's very, very key. And as you do this and you learn to love yourself, that then spills over into loving other people. You will naturally be more accepting, more patient, more kind when you learn to give yourself that gift of love, because then you can find it much easier to give that gift to other people. You can share the bounty that you have inside. You don't feel a projection. If somebody has a weakness, if somebody has a deficiency, if somebody has something that used to upset you, you recognize that's something that upsets me in my own mind, but now I'm learning to love myself about that. Therefore, I'm not upset when I see it in someone else. It's all good. It's okay. I allow, I accept, I forgive. I'm going into non-judgment. I'm going into non-duality. That is really, really key. This is part of the ascension process. And in the Law of One, it says that we are going through a worldwide transformation, and that transformation will lead to those of us who are sufficiently loving enough going into some sort of superhero-like state, a light body where you now can levitate, you have telepathy, you have telekinesis, you can hear other people's thoughts, you know about your past lives, you have the ability to bilocate yourself, you can teleport with your consciousness. This is the promise that's in all these ancient prophecies. There's so many different prophecies that have talked about this. So ascension is the idea that you are becoming some kind of superhero, some sort of very powerful being. And you get there through service to others, through love, through acceptance, through forgiveness, through compassion. You find it for yourself, it becomes much easier to give it to others. That's the gift that you want to give. When you can do this sufficiently, you have the potential now to be able to take this wave that's coming from the universe that apparently will make it possible to have this light body activation. That is very exciting. We are going to be talking about this again. I have another one of these coming up next week, and it is going to be on Saturday, February 16th. See, I have my notes now. At 4 p.m. Pacific time. So next Saturday, February 16th, 4 p.m. Pacific time, and we're going to call it Ascension Through the Ages. And in this broadcast, next Saturday, I'm going to start to talk about the different prophecies of ascension from different times and places. And you're going to see how all of these pieces fit together. Every different religious teaching, every different tradition, getting us up to this idea of some sort of cosmic light body activation. So that's coming up next week. I'm David Wilcock here, and we will now conclude our live stream. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I wish you all the best.